intimidation on all sides. I think sure they were thinking, oh my goodness, here's this Green Party person coming into the department. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm Green going into the Department of Agriculture.
Hello and welcome to Agri Focus, brought to you by Agriland. I'm Stella Meehan and I'm joined today to mark International Women's Day this week by Minister of State at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, Pippa Hackett. Minister Hackett has responsibility for land use and biodiversity, which incorporates forestry and organics in particular. She was first elected to Offaly County Council in 2019 local elections as a Green Party representative and replaced her party colleague Grace O'Sullivan as a senator for the agricultural panel later in 2019 when Grace was elected to the European Parliament. Minister Hackett holds an agricultural degree along with her husband, Councillor Mark Hackett. They operate an organic beef and sheep farm in County Offaly. Minister Hackett, thank you for joining us. First of all, apart from being a wife and a mother, tell us, what do you consider yourself first? A politician, an environmentalist, or even a farmer?
Thanks, Stella. It's great to be here. I think I always first and foremost considered myself a mother first, and then a wife. And then I'm thinking how I usually order the list. Farmer comes next, very much so. So I think the farming piece is very central to my being and what my beliefs and, what I want to achieve. And the politics came, relatively late in my own life. It's just really the last 6 or 7 years that I've been involved. So, but certainly farming and has, formed my views on life very much. And, I've always loved the outdoor life and I've always had a deep respect for nature. So a farmer environmentalist, if that can be the wording.
And then what provoked you into politics?
I think just as I got a bit older, as I became a mother, and I suppose my children were getting a bit older when they started school, I took about 10 years out. I was involved in academia up until about 2003 or 4. My first child was born in 2003. So I took my normal maternity leave, went back. I was working in the University of Limerick. And then I got pregnant with my second child and she was born in 2005, but I didn't go back after that. So I pretty much took about 10 years off, had 2 more children, and we sort of very much, myself and my husband Mark, focused on the farm and what we wanted to do. And we've always tried different things and we've certainly evolved over the years. I've been talking to people recently who've been, they're busy lambing and have been lambing, indoors. And we did all of that. We lambed 600 ewes, in indoors over the winter, had them all. And now we've completely moved towards a very much outdoor based system to make things easier for us on the farm. So I suppose, how do I get involved in politics? I suppose through my kids, the school they were at, we got involved in the school community. Then as the children got older, they might have got involved in sports, or athletics was a particular thing that they got involved with. So I suppose my community outreach increased as the children, got older. And I just felt eventually like there's only so much you can do on your own, and even in a small community. And if you really want to sort of affect change, and actually it was litter picking which really sort of drove me to it, because you can get a lot of enthusiasm initially in communities and that wanes off and you end up with the same 3 or 4 people doing all the work. And I just saw that as quite a frustrating thing. And how do we make things better? And really the only thing to change, to affect proper change, is through politics.
That's true. It's how a lot of politicians get into politics. Certainly at a local level, they start out as maybe community activists. It's definitely a route into it for them. And when you were undertaking, you have a number of educational qualifications, but when you were undertaking your degree and your qualifications in agriculture, did you have an end goal at that time to work in agriculture, or did you want to get them to apply them to maybe farming, or had you any idea that you would end up so intrinsically linked to the agricultural sector in this country?
No, I suppose I didn't really have an end goal. I did meet my husband through our our degrees in agriculture. We did meet and we did our degrees in the UK, and I met him there, and he's from County Offaly and I was from County Mayo, but he'd come from the farming background. I certainly didn't, but certainly grew up in the in the middle of nowhere in County Mayo, surrounded by farms. So I suppose I always had that sort of outdoor attachment, but no, just sort of things evolved. I ended up doing a postgraduate in UCD in the veterinary college in equine science. I was always quite passionate about horses as well. And then I ended up doing a PhD in UL. So I sort of stayed at college quite a long while when Mark, my husband, after his degree, came back to farm. But look, we'd been going out for years and years. And I suppose my interest in farming grew in a practical sense as well when I didn't have that opportunity previously. So I think it was only natural that we would, once we got married, that we would focus very much on the farm and to make it work for us. The politics, as I said, came later. And look, I still have to pinch myself every day to think that I'm in the role I'm in, a minister in the Department of Agriculture, responsible for, policy change in a sector I'm passionate about. So it's a real privilege.
And it seems that you are passionate, because I don't think, as you mentioned there, I don't think a lot of people would have known how much of a background you have in agricultural education and farming yourself before you ever came to politics. So that might be something new for people to learn today.
I think so. I think, and I know it's a massive advantage for me, to the first day in the Department of Agriculture. Is trepidation on all sides. I think sure they were thinking, oh my goodness, here's this Green Party person coming into the department. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm Green going into the Department of Agriculture. But look, everything very much ironed out. And look, while we might have a different view on different aspects of agriculture, as a farmer myself, I believe in the sector and I want to see it work. And I think, there's massive strides we can make to make it work. And I think it's exciting. It's challenging and it's difficult, and nobody really likes to change, but change we must. And, we have to embrace the opportunity that comes with it. And I think the farming sector is very much, it's very adaptable. It's resilient. We know that. And, it's well able to embrace the change we need to make.
That's true. And agriculture, I suppose, would traditionally be a sector that was mostly dominated by men, and probably to some extent still is, not for any particular reason, but just it came historically. And how have you found working in DAFM since 2019? As a female farmer, as a female politician, you've two male colleagues. How have you found that dynamic?
I think the dynamic's been fine. And to give the department its due, it's quite balanced in terms of gender diversity, in its employees, all the way up from sort of lower levels up to senior management. And that was refreshing to see. I think, though, when you look outside of the department into the wider agricultural sector and the farming sector, it is very much dominated by men. I mean, you only have to look at some of the committees of the farm orgs. I mean, you're lucky to find one or two women, and unfortunately you see the women on the family committees and those sort of committees. And it's still a little bit old school in their attitudes. Now we are seeing changes. We've seen the IFA appoint or elect a vice president who's the first female, which is great to see, Alice indeed. Right, yeah. And it's great to see Alice in that role. But I do think, when you do scratch beneath the surface and you'll be aware of a sort of underlying frustration among women in farming, that they have gone for decades unacknowledged, unsupported. And, I think there's more awareness now of that, but we do need to see, I suppose, more change on the ground to support those.
And I suppose to acknowledge, for people within the industry to acknowledge that women can indeed know as much as men, which traditionally I think it was always like, shucks, what does she know? But they genuinely do. There's women out there farming in every kind of enterprise at the moment that would, buy and sell you tomorrow morning in terms of how to run a good enterprise on a farm.
Absolutely. And, there is that sense that, unless you're the person wearing the welly boots and doing all the hard manual work on the farm, you're not really the farmer. But, that we're not meaning to offend anyone. Oftentimes there's a woman behind the scenes who does all of the paperwork, all of that background work that keeps farms going, keeps them on the road, and make the decisions. And I've had the great privilege again as minister to travel around the country and meet so many different farmers, male and female. But I think hand on heart, I can say that I think I've seen a lot of innovation from female women on farms, and sometimes that drive to change something on the farm comes from the female side, whether we're a little bit more, more likely to take a risk or a step or make the change. There's something there. And it's been refreshing again for me to see that,
And speaking of the drive to change, can I ask you why yourself and your husband moved from conventional farming to organic, what was the kind of idea? Was it ideology? Was it financial? What provoked you to change?
It was a bit of everything. I tell you what it mainly was sort of frustration with the norm, because it was quite regimented, you know. It was a little bit, you know, too structured in a way for us, and that works for some people. Look, we'd been farming for 15 years, my husband, since he was a child, doing the norm. And I think, again, with our children coming along, we just looked at it with a different view and thought, well, maybe there's something else. Maybe we want to have a little bit more, I've always said this, you know, taking back a little bit more control of how we farm. And when you do change how you farm, and if people choose to go organic, you do have to think differently about how you farm. And certainly, I think we were probably a little bit bored with doing it the old way. And just it enabled us to open a few more doors for us, and it made us think about how we farm more. And I think, I mean, my husband always says this as well, that, you know, it's definitely the best decision we made for our farm. And I've always said it might not suit every farm. It'll suit a vast majority of farms on Ireland, I think, to certainly look at it. And we have a new sort of, it's 10 years old now that we know it's 10 years ago we made the change to organics. But in that 10 years, we just have a newfound, I think, love of farming. And I mean, farming is a way of life. Yes, it's a business as well, but it's also a way of life. Nobody's going to be a millionaire out of farming. Well, you know, very few of us anyway. So you have to like what you do. And we love what we do on our farm. We love being farmers. And, you know, we have our sheep, we have our suckler cows, we have a bit of forestry, a couple of horses, cats, dogs, you name it. So it's fun, you know, and I think you have to enjoy what you do and you have to love what you do. And we very much do now, yeah.
Absolutely. And in terms of others then turning towards organics, do you think there's still a bit of hesitancy or reticence among, you know, conventional farmers about the idea of turning to organics?
I think some of that still exists, but I think we've definitely seen a step change in the last number of years, certainly since this government went into place. And, you know, we've seen nearly a trebling of the numbers of farmers, or over a trebling of numbers of farmers in the area of land. So it has always been very small. I think there was only something like 1,600 farmers in organics, you know, back to 2000 and now, or sorry, 2020. And now we're in 2024 and we'll have 5,000 farmers farming organically. It's still a small number, but there's a little bit more of, I suppose, a snowballing effect. And you know, with numbers comes a little bit of security and confidence in people, you know, to make those steps. There's a massive amount of information now out there. You know, we've certainly seen Teagasc, you know, really, you know, putting their shoulder to the wheel in this regard, and between farm walks and advisory services and meetings, that just wasn't there 5 years ago. And there's massive opportunity there. Even the Work Board B is doing, I mean, some of the criticisms are, there's no markets for the stuff. There are markets for organic produce. There are markets now for organic beef and lamb, and there will be. I'd love to see more dairy. That's challenging because dairy is quite a profitable sector as it is. And, you know, we do have a number, maybe 100 dairy farmers organically farming. But look, it's a step change for people. It can be a big decision. Sometimes the decision is, you know, the challenge with it is not actually in how you farm. It's more in your head and maybe that's where some of the reticence comes from. But I think things are changing and nobody's been forced to do it. It's an option there. The advice is there. Go and talk to another organic farmer if you're worried about something. But it's great. I think on the whole, anyone who has made the shift, especially people who've been in it for a number of years, been farming organically, seem very content with their lot. And I think that's a good sign.
Oh, they have. Yeah, we have many testimonials to that as well. Your other part of your portfolio is the forestry section. And when you took over forestry, obviously it was, you know, widely reported of all the trouble they had kind of with backlogs and everything. But you've had it now a few years. So how do you feel the progress has gone in it?
I think it is fair to say when I took it over, it was an absolute mess. It was a terrible shambles, and it essentially took 3 years to fix some of those issues, you know, in terms of the backlog in the appeals, backlog in licenses. And we did that. I mean, I suppose that was one of the main parts that we had to get right. Second part was to really get a good forestry program off the ground. And that did take a bit longer than we would have liked. It was signed off last September. You know, it could have been earlier, but that was the efforts we had to go to get the really we had to get permission from the European Commission. We can't just spend money on what we like, even though it's our own money. You know, there are rules and European rules around state aid, and we had to, you know, jump through some big hoops over that. But that programme is there. It's the best ever funded programme, 1.3 billion euros of our own money to invest in farmers across the country. I think that, and there's a whole range of different forestry types now for farmers to plant. So there's something there for everyone if they're interested. And then there's a few other issues. I mean, we still have the ash dieback issue to clear up, and I'm inching away towards a solution on that. It's prolonged. We have to make sure we get this right. We've had a couple of ash dieback schemes up to now that farmers haven't been overly happy with. So I remain, you know, strong in my determination to deliver a package that farmers will be happy with, to try and move ash dieback off the table once and for all.
I think so. I think farmers will definitely get on board for a programme that they feel, you know, works for them, something that unfortunately, you know, doesn't end up in rot, or, you know, like, I think farmers are always open to new programs and schemes that will bring a benefit, you know, be it for the environment, for themselves as well. Obviously, it's nice to have the incentive. So I do think people will get on board if there's something put out there, certainly.
Yeah, I think so. And look, there's always going to be challenges with agriculture, forestry, anything like this, when you're actually dealing with nature and the natural world and natural ecology. We're seeing the effects of climate change, you know, globally and locally. We're seeing increased risk of pests and diseases because of that. So it's always going to be, there are going to be challenges across the board forevermore, to be honest. And we just have to be resilient. We have to be quick to either, you know, adapt in advance of challenges, and then be quick to respond if they do arise. And I think that's going to feature, I think, a lot now in agriculture, forestry, how we use our land into the future.
And then, as a Green Party politician, Minister Hackett, do you feel you meet with a lot of resistance or criticism from the agriculture or even other sectors on a regular basis, particularly in this country?
It sort of depends where you go. I mean, look, you know, people naturally think, you know, farmers and the Greens will never mix, but we have actually quite a number of farmers who are members of the Green Party.
Well, you're a Green farmer.
Well, I'm one for once, but I do know quite a few others. You know, they mightn't be front row centre on that, or maybe don't want to shout that from the rooftops. But if you can't, I mean, you can be a farmer and you can be green, and you can be green and you can be a farmer. And I think it's important to not make this like one or the other thing, because everyone has every sector has its challenges. Every, you know, whether, you know, whatever sector people work in or are responsible for, there are challenges. And farming, I think, has the opportunity to deal with so many of those challenges where other sectors don't. And farmers on the ground, I mean, I always think there's a lot of, you know, I suppose farming, if from the outside, and it's hard to say because I am a farmer, but maybe from a public view, when they look at farming, they think farming is like in a terrible state. It sounds like it's an awful, you know, the sector's in turmoil, because you see, you know, protests, especially across Europe, but even in Ireland, you know, I mean, even the current IFA thing, enough is enough. Like, enough of what is enough? You know, I mean, it looks on the outside, and I think it's unfair to portray agriculture like that, because, I mean, as a farmer, I feel very privileged to actually own land that, you know, that we can nurture and manage and produce food from, and grow crops, or, you know, produce meat. And so many people out there would just love to be in that position. You know, people would love to have like a quarter of an acre, to have a few hens and a bit of, you know, and the vast majority of the population don't have that. And I think, you know, we sometimes have to sit back out of ourselves and think, well, actually, I am very lucky to be able to farm and to own farm. And I know farming can be challenging, but there's opportunity there again. And government is, you know, we just come from launching a big 60 million euro water EIP project there in County Westmeath this morning. And it's just, the money, the government is pumping so much money into agriculture, and sometimes gets lost in some of the arguments. And, you know, it's a bit unfortunate, because we are very supportive of the agriculture sector, you know, as a government. Governments have always been supportive in Ireland of that agriculture sector and farming. But sometimes when you read some of the headlines, you think we're just sort of sitting back and doing nothing. I know I've moved away from your original question about it can be challenging being green in rural areas and that, but there's, you know, and there is a negative message out there from certain people, that use it for their own advantage politically or otherwise, and the Greens are destroying rural Ireland. But when you actually say, well, give me an example, they do sort of sit back and say, oh, well, and they have to think about it, so it's easy to rattle that off the tongue, and it's easy for people to say, oh, the Greens are ruining agriculture in Ireland. Well, we're not actually, because when you look at since the Greens came into government, there's more money in directed towards farming than ever before. We've more farmers can go organic. There's more money in forestry than before. There are only a few things under my own remit, but even things like, as we have to move on this journey to sustainability and more environmentally friendly practices, things like, the multi-species sward and red clover. I mean, we red clover on our own farm first time last year. Now, we've had multi-species for a number of years, but it's great to see that becoming slightly more mainstream. So it's not just, you can get caught up in nitrates and all of these issues, but when you take a zoom back and look at the bigger picture, I think farmers, are lucky. They're privileged to be able to do what they do, and sometimes I have to remind myself of that, to think about that sometimes too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, given the week that's in it, International Women's Day, would you say, Minister Hackett, it's more challenging as a woman to be involved in politics or agriculture? Or do you think it's no more challenging than for your male colleagues?
Well, it's an interesting question, actually, pitching those two on two different ways. It's probably more challenging to be involved in politics than agriculture. I think, politics for anyone. I know we're coming up to local elections and European elections. It's incredible. And I was actually at a International Women's Day event during the week at the British Embassy, and we were talking about all of those issues as well, particularly from the political side. But politics is incredibly busy. I've never been as busy in my life before, ever. And I, especially for the first year in my ministerial role, I just couldn't believe how incredibly busy it was. And I do have a respect for every politician, even if I might not agree at all with their views. They all work hard for what they want to do and what they believe in. So it's hard work, the politics. Is it harder because you're a woman? It's different because you're a woman, because sometimes you are in male-dominated rooms, and that's okay, but still a woman's voice is even the tone of it's different, but women bring different views, different perspectives to tables. When I was in Offaly County Council, I was one of only 2 women in 19, and lots of councils, particularly rural based councils, are like that. You have very few women, and it makes a difference to the dynamic even in the room, and I found that certainly when I was there, and so I think certainly we do need to see more women involved in politics. But it's not just to balance the dynamic. We bring a different perspective, and, we can't ignore 50% of the population's perspective on issues. So, but I think, again, there are moves to try and increase those numbers. However we do it, people are critical of things like quotas, but you might criticise the system, but if it delivers at the other end, then, I think that's worthwhile looking at. But agriculture in a similar way, but I think politics is probably harder than the farming side, yeah.
And 2 final questions for you then. So the first one is, what would be the most challenging aspect of your job? Be it as whatever, a farmer, a mum, a politician, whatever it may be.
I think it's probably trying to strike the balance a bit, because, okay, my children were a bit older when I got into politics. I'm thinking back now, my youngest is now 12, so he would have been about 7 or, which is still young,
It is.
And my oldest would have been, he's 20 now. So they were still off an age where, for the last essentially, well, certainly since I was elected as a senator and maybe up to the council. So for the last 5 years, I've sort of been very much removed from the home, when before that I was always there, because I'd taken this chunk of time off from my career. I was at home all the time working away, but now I was outside a lot, and that's quite challenging, I find, for me personally. And then just to get the balance right, because I was home last night quite late, and you come home and you're in the door at 9 o'clock, and you're tired and you're grumpy, and then you've a husband there who'd like to sit and watch telly or talk about the day, and it's just, and he's busy too. So it's the time consuming bit, and get that balance right, I think, so you have to try and get some time out. Now it's not easy as a politician, because there's something on at the weekends, you have to be somewhere, and now as we ramp up towards election time and everything, that's just going to get worse. So it's just what I do find is I do love, even if I can get a couple of hours at the weekend doing something, whether it's outside or even just because I hardly get on the farm now because I'm hardly ever at home, but I do like the weekends to definitely get out there, whiz around the fields, have a look at the stock and see how just to get out there and take a few deep breaths of fresh air and say, right, this is what it's all about. You know?
Well,
so,
it is essentially
focus,
what it's all about for anybody, no matter what walk of life that you're in. And finally then, Minister Hackett, just before we let you go, what is the most rewarding aspect of your job, would you say?
I think just having the opportunity, certainly through my ministerial role, of getting around and meeting people I would never have met before, and meeting people who I might share a passion with, whether it's farming or otherwise. And there's so many people out there doing such wonderful things, being innovative. And I think there's a whole cohort of people I would never have had the opportunity to meet, and not just through farming either, even locally, or you see people with business ideas and they come up with them and they've done a lot of the work themselves. And okay, they might get some support from government or local authorities or local supports, but the ideas that are out there and the capacity and the ability of people, and particularly women. I mean, I've met so many women who've on farms who've branched out with an on-farm project or idea.
Absolutely.
And it's their thing, and it's almost in a strange way going back to, like, if you go back in Ireland 100 years ago, farming, like the women did like the things like the hens and the eggs and maybe the cream off the milk. And that was their sideline. And that sort of disappeared, as generations went on, it was lost. And in a way, that's maybe how women became lost in agriculture as well. They weren't there, they weren't seen anymore, they weren't going to the town with the eggs at the weekend and so forth. And now it's almost like an evolution. It's come round again where women again are being inspired to branch out on the farm. So I've met women who grow flowers on a little patch of land behind the shed, and they sell fabulous, homegrown bouquets of flowers. I mean, people will be aware there's women out there doing stuff with vegetables and fruit and beetroot juice. There's so many examples of women have innovated on the farm. And the farm still goes on. It's not the whole farm is converted to growing flowers. It's just a little bit there, but it's sort of enabled women to get a bit more industrious from the farm. And it's great to see those little success stories. They're little now, but they pack a big punch. And I've certainly seen, even through my own department, there's a program called Acorns, which supports women in rural areas. Popular. And the women you meet through that are like, wow, that's amazing. And where did you get that idea? And sometimes the ideas just fall in their laps and they thought, I thought I'd run with it. But they have the guts to go and drive on and push on with it. And it's inspiring for me as well. So yeah, that's the best bit, being inspired by inspiring women.
Fantastic. Well, I couldn't find a better way to sum up our special International Women's Day Agri-Focus episode than with that thought. Minister Pippa Hackett, thank you very much for joining us. That's all we have time for on this episode of Agri-Focus. Please do rate and review the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or on the app on Agriland, wherever you get your podcasts. And do share it with people who you think might be interested in. Maybe the woman in your life would like to have a listen. Until the next time, goodbye and take care.